I'm back. Here we go with our nouns and their cases. Update for you. I did on the first conjugation video in the description box below the video, there is now a link to some exercises you can do. Also, that link contains basically an explanation of what we're doing, why we're doing it, kind of like what I've done in the video. But if you want a hard copy of it to refer to, knock yourself out. And it has a bunch of vocabulary, a bunch of verbs and their principal parts. It would be a good idea to learn those because they're pretty common verbs. So that is up, and as of the completion of this video, I will put a link in the description box underneath the video for the stuff that we talk about in this video, and some activities that you can do just to practice and get more comfortable with nouns, cases, all that stuff. Okay, so here we go. We are going to talk about nouns. Nouns in Latin are kind of involved. It's one of the things that I think students struggle with the most, and I think it's mostly because we don't know our English grammar very well. And we see cases and things like this in English, and I'll show you examples where we see it. We just don't think of it that way. So you actually do see these things happening in English. You just don't know that it's happening because nobody's ever explained it to you, okay? So this is something that students tend to struggle with a little bit, but I think if you get a clear explanation, which I hope I can provide, and you take it a little bit at a time and you just soak it in and memorize. I think it's gonna be okay. No matter how good you are in English or how bad you are in English, this is doable. It's not brain surgery. It's not rocket science. Okay, or as I used to say when I was a little kid, it's not brain science. It's not rocket surgery. Okay. Yes, that was me as a child. Okay, so your teacher. Okay, nouns. Hopefully you know what a noun is, but in case you're fuzzy or in case it's not something that you've been taught properly in your English class, here it is. It's a person, place, thing, or idea, okay? And we can have proper nouns, which are specific places, specific people, specific things, okay? Rice Krispies is a specific kind of cereal. It's actually a name brand of a cereal, okay? It would be capitalized in English. Paris is a specific place. It's capitalized. It's a proper noun. Elvis Presley is a proper noun. He was a specific person, okay? So, that's nouns. Nouns are kind of the same way in Latin, only they're just a little bit more involved than what we have in English, because English doesn't have what we call inflection as much as Latin does. We still have inflection, and I will show that to you. Inflection means that words change how they look in order to show what they're doing in their sentence, okay? And nouns are some of the biggest candidates for inflection in the Latin language, which makes them challenging in some ways, but still, it's just like putting a puzzle together. You just have to know the pieces of the puzzle and where they go, and you'll be fine. So here we go. Case. Latin has technically 6 cases. The nominative and the vocative are kind of put together. I'll explain why here in a minute. The case shows what the noun is doing in the sentence. Okay, so the subject of the sentence has a case. The direct object in a sentence has a case. The object of a preposition has a case. Possessives, like John's bicycle. John's would be in a specific case in Latin, okay? The reason they have cases is because they don't have word order, okay? In English, we have usually subject, verb, object. Okay? If you do a really simple English sentence, Pat hides candy. Okay? Really simple sentence. Subject, right here. Pat is the subject of this sentence. Hides is your verb. And what is she hiding? She's hiding candy. That makes it the object. Okay? We have word order. We kind of know where the subject is because it's usually the first thing in the sentence. Okay? The only time it doesn't appear first is if A, there are conjunctions or something before it, or B, if you're reading poetry or older English stuff where they put subjects in weird places in the sentence, which nowadays the writing that most people do these days, the subject is pretty close to first in the sentence. Okay? Latin doesn't have this. There's no such thing as word order in Latin. There are a few rules for where you can put words and where you can't, but they're few and far between. So we have to have cases, okay? Because the case tells us what that word is doing. If we didn't have cases, Latin would be nonsense. You couldn't make sense out of it. So, here we go. We're going to talk about these cases. Remember that they tell us exactly what that noun is doing in the sentence. And our cases are, drum roll please, nominative and vocative. We'll talk about that, okay, and why they're together. Genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative, okay? We are going to focus on the nominative and the accusative for now, but I am going to give you an introduction to each of these in turn so that you kind of understand what they are, and we are going to learn the endings for first declension, all the endings, how to decline a noun for all the cases in both numbers, singular and plural, okay? But when we're doing sentences and stuff, it's mostly going to be nominative and accusative that we're going to be worried about right now because they're the most straightforward of the cases. Maybe genitive's pretty straightforward, but nominative and accusative you're gonna use a ton. You'll use a lot of ablative too, by the way, but ablative has like 20 different uses. So here we go. Let's talk about each case and what it's going to do. I'm going to erase this, and we're going to hit each case, and we're going to talk about its job in the sentence. And then, once we get that down, we are going to get some endings put up here, and we're going to talk about how you decline a noun. You conjugate verbs, you decline nouns, okay? That's how Latin works. So here we go. Nominative. I'm going to do this one... there we go. I'm going to do this one by itself. I will do vocative right after it. Okay, I know I had vocative up there. Nominative is pretty simple and straightforward. It deals with subjects. Okay, your subject of a sentence is always going to be in the nominative. Okay? It's really the only job the nominative has. It can be a subject and it can be a subject complement. And we will get to that later. We do not need to deal with that right now. Okay? So, subject. Okay? In my sentence, Pat hides candy. Okay? Pat is the subject. She would be in the nominative, or he. It's a unisex name. Okay? So, vocative. The reason why vocative is usually right next to the nominative is because they usually look the same. They have the same kind of ending. This is used for direct address. There are only a couple situations where the vocative looks any different than the nominative. And we will talk about that later on. Direct address. So if I'm going to say somebody's name, like I'm talking to them, like I do my daughter, you know, Penny, come here. If I said that, Penny, my daughter's name, would be in the vocative, okay? And a lot of times in Latin, you'll see O, and I'll just, O Cataline, okay? You'll see this O in front, or O Sulla, or whatever, okay? That'll tip you off a lot. You'll also see it set off by commas, okay? Just like in English, if I said, Penny, come here, proper grammar dictates that I put a comma here. Penny, comma, come here. Okay? There's that comma. And you'd see that in Latin too. Not because the Romans actually used commas, because they didn't even have spaces, but because we have English editors who have translated this work and put it into books and so forth for us. We now have some English grammar added in, and you will see commas in Latin passages that you're translating, okay? So those are the two ways. You'll see either an O and a word and a comma, or you'll just see the word and then the comma. And it'll kind of tip you off, and context is going to tell you that it's evocative. It's not exactly the hardest thing to spot. It's also not the most common thing. You're not going to run into it all the time, but you do need to know that it exists so you can deal with it when you see it. Genitive is next. Okay? We use this for possession. And I am not talking about being demon possessed or anything, okay? This is for showing possession. Who owns something, okay? The person or thing that owns or has whatever we're talking about goes in the genitive. It's never the thing that's possessed. It's never the thing that's owned that goes in the genitive. It's always the owner, okay? So if I want to say Penny's bike, okay? Penny's is actually in the genitive. We have an Anglo-genitive, okay, in English. We don't talk about it like that. We just call it possessive. But it's the genitive in English, okay? This is one of the instances where you see inflection in English. This is called an Anglo-genitive, okay? Just so you know. You can fascinate people at your next cocktail party. The genitive, it shows possession. Whose bike is it? It's Penny's, okay? And we know that this is possessive because we have the apostrophe, okay? I know a lot of people who don't put apostrophes in their possessives. They make them look like plurals. It drives me nuts. That apostrophe shows us that it is possessive. In Latin, the genitive case and its ending are going to show you that something is owned by somebody or something. Okay, so Penny's bike, Penny would be in the genitive. Okay, I don't even know what my daughter's name would be in Latin. Her name is actually Greek in origin, so whatever. But I could do, let's see here. Okay. A feast of Sulla, or Sulla's feast. Okay, this is a genitive. Okay, and notice the word order doesn't exist. Okay, we call it Sulla's feast or Sulla's dinner, but it's not in that order, is it, in Latin? All right, so genitive shows possession, and it's always the thing possessed or owned that goes in the genitive. It's never going to be the person or the thing that is owned. And yes, there are people in Latin that are owned. They're called slaves. So you will see that. You will see people referred to as property, because in the ancient world, slavery was very common. And it's not the same thing. This is a side note. Slavery in the ancient world is not the same thing as we saw in America in the 1800s. Just so you know. Okay, so dative. This is for, oh, excuse me, indirect objects. And some other things, okay? But for right now, indirect object, that's where you need to camp. Indirect objects are the indirect recipients of an action. It's the person who benefits from or is disadvantaged by an action. It can also be a thing that's disadvantaged, but usually it's a human. I can't think of too many examples where the indirect object is going to be a thing. I'm sure they're out there, and if I think long enough about it, I'll think of one. But here's an example in English of an indirect object. Okay? I make pizza for my friend. Okay, now the indirect object in this is friend. This is the person who is benefiting from the action, okay? They are not the thing being made. We'll talk about that when we get to the accusative. I am not making a friend, okay? I am making a pizza, okay? But my friend is the indirect recipient. Okay, they are getting some sort of benefit, or if the pizza's really bad, they're being disadvantaged by it, okay? I give poison to the king. And no, I wouldn't actually do that, but I give poison to the king. King is your indirect object. He is the one being disadvantaged by the action, very badly disadvantaged, okay? That is an indirect object. All right, you won't have to, at least in my videos, we won't be hitting that for a little bit yet because I want you to get comfortable with some of the more basic cases, but keep that in mind, okay? When we do accusative here in a second, we're going to hit the distinction between a direct object and an indirect object. All right, and while we're talking about that, accusative. This is for direct objects or object of a preposition. Okay? So, direct objects. Let's look at our sentences up above and talk about what the direct object is. We know that the indirect object, I'm going to call it the I-O, was over here. Okay, we know that. Now let's talk about where the direct object is. The direct object is the thing being verbed, basically. Okay, so you have to ask yourself the question, I make pizza for my friend. Make is our verb. What am I making? I'm making pizza. Pizza is my direct object. It is the thing that I am verbing, okay? Make is my verb. Pizza is my direct object. I just put D-O up there because it's too squishy to write direct object. I give poison to the king. King is my indirect object. Give is my verb. Hopefully you said verb. Okay, if you didn't, need to review. What am I giving? I'm giving poison. This is my direct object. Okay? It's the thing that's being verbed. It's the easiest way to think of it. It is the direct recipient of the action. Okay? I hit the ball. The ball is the direct object. It's the thing I'm hitting. Okay? We used that example yesterday in one of my lessons. All right. Object of a preposition. There are prepositions that take the accusative in Latin. Okay? Some of them take the ablative, some of them take the accusative. We will talk about prepositions in a little while, not today, but later on. Prepositions usually show a positional relationship between two things. Think of a monkey and a desk. Okay, anywhere the monkey can be in relation to the desk. The monkey's under the desk, the monkey's above the desk, the monkey's in the desk, the monkey's at the desk, the monkey's in front of the desk. Think of that, okay? So on, under, in, over, things like that, those are all prepositions. And in Latin, some of those prepositions take the accusative case, and they are called objects of the preposition. We'll talk about that later on. Just know that it's there, okay? Don't start pulling your hair out. Ablative. Last case that we're going to talk about for now. And then I'm going to give you a break, and I'm going to do a little prep work for the next video, and I will get to declining, okay? We'll get to the really meat of our plate here. Okay, ablative. This has a lot of uses. We literally referred to certain ablatives in college as the ablative of last resort. There are so many different kinds of ablatives, but the ablative that you need to worry about right now is object of a preposition. Oh my gosh. Let's just try that again. That was a fail. Preposition. There we go. I can write. Okay. So that's the only use you need to worry about right now, is the object of the preposition. And it's the same idea as the accusative. It's just that some prepositions take the ablative case rather than the accusative case. And there are explanations as to how you can know which case is called for, other than just memorizing, which some of it is memorization. You just have to memorize. And I'm just going to keep saying that because it's true. You're going to have to memorize. I will, in the very first video I made, I will attach a little document that I wrote up on tips for learning Latin, and it might help you. If it helps you, great, use it. If it doesn't, you know, perforate it, put it on a roll, whatever you want to do. So these are all the cases and what they do, okay? There's no word order in Latin, so these cases are super duper important, okay? If I change word order in English, sentences change their meaning. Well, if you change cases in Latin, then you change the meaning of the sentence, okay? Always memorize them in this order, okay? The British people who write Latin textbooks, sometimes they will do nominative and then accusative. I have never memorized their order. I've always memorized it by this order. If you see nominative, accusative, and I think then it goes to genitive, dative, ablative, I'm not sure. Like I said, I memorized it in this order, and this was the order that it was always presented to us when I was in college and grad school. So memorize them in this order. Do not memorize them in whatever order you want to memorize them in. It will screw you up. It will mess with you, okay? Get them memorized in the same order every single time. Every time. Do not change the order of the cases as you're declining or as you're writing out endings or anything like that. You will suffer, and it's a completely unnecessary suffering. All right? So, nominative / vocative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative. Those are your cases. Those are the guys that we're going to worry about in our next video when we start declining. All right? So, hang in there. I'm going to get some stuff attached to my video, and then we will hit declensions. Okay, we're going to do first declension just like we had first conjugation. All right, we have first declension coming your way. Stay tuned.